I'm here in the new studio. I was just showing it to my friend Linda, who's here visiting the office today.
Thank you for having me today.
And we're testing out mics and testing out things. And she started asking me about what I do and how the law has been changed recently in Florida. So I said, why don't we just sit down and have a chat about it?
100%. Yeah, there's a lot of confusion. I mean, I definitely want to know more about not just what you do, but also like how the laws are changing, how it would affect consumers and, you know, an average person like myself.
Yeah, because I mean, I focus my practice on personal injury.
Okay.
So it's anybody who's injured by the negligence of someone else. Accidents is the most common thing, like a car accident. But it could be a fall somewhere, an assault, a sexual assault, things of that nature. So if you're injured and it seems like it wasn't your fault and it shouldn't have happened, then that's something we look into. And we always like tell people consultations are free so they can call and ask, and we kind of let them know. But this year in 2023, we had not such great luck in our Florida legislative branch because we had some laws passed that really hurt the victim of injury. And I was telling you about that.
Right. There's a lot of confusion around that topic, which is why I haven't really been able to explain to people that ask me like, hey, can you like give me the details behind this law? Like, if there are any limitations? Like, and I'm like, you know what? Let me ask an expert and make sure that I have the right answer. So, yeah.
I appreciate that because I do think I am an expert in what I do.
I would say so.
I do what I do at a very high caliber, and I take a lot of pride in it. And I think that people should obviously focus on what they do and become an expert at it so that society is better that way. But what happened this year is the type of law I do is called tort in law. And they did what they call like a tort reform. They were trying to limit the way that people can present claims for injury or go against their own insurances when their insurance, either auto insurance or property insurance at your home, doesn't pay what they need to pay. So there's a lot of different parts to it, but I'll, briefly from the very top, what I like to say is that attorneys are not politicians. We don't give political opinions. We're not campaigning. We're not on a platform. But we do have to abide by the law and enforce the law. And sometimes what happens is that if the law is skewed in one way for one side way too much, then our hands are tied. Right. So no matter what grade of an attorney you are, if it's wrong, it's wrong. And one thing I will tell everybody is that even though I'm not a politician, I am a people person and I stand for people and individual rights. And when they start chipping away at your individual rights, specifically constitutional rights, I have a problem. So that's kind of where this stuff comes in.
So what do you mean by like the personal constitutional rights? Like in terms of like the insurance stuff?
So what I think makes our country or the human experience in our country different from the rest of the world is our constitution and the way we've upheld it. Right. And truly any government, any country, what it is a human experiment. Yes. If you look at the Caribbean islands, some of them flourished, some of them didn't. And some of them have been left to just kind of, figure themselves out. And it's sad to watch that some people came in there, had these great ideas, and then had a failed experiment, and now those people are just the ones paying for it. Right. Well, in the United States, we've been lucky that even though as a young nation, we've been able to grow and continue to layer on that. And it really just comes down to our constitutional rights. Because everyone says, well, it's human rights. We're kind of spoiled here in the U.S. If you travel a little bit, you realize you have no rights on this planet unless you make them, you abide by them, and you uphold them. Right. And what happened with these laws, for example, if you look at and I brought it here because the 7th Amendment of our U.S. Constitution talks about suits at common law. That is civil trial. That is civil cases. That's what I do. That's a personal injury. Someone crashes into you. It caused you damage. You want to go after them for that compensation, be it the property damage of your vehicle, be it your injuries. So the 7th Amendment says where the value of in controversy shall exceed $20. So just something as small as $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall otherwise be re-examined by any court of the U.S. other than by common law. But basically what it's saying is that your jury is your peers. Your peers are the ones that are going to judge you. It's not a politician. It's not the king. It's not the president. It's not anybody else but the peers, people, right? And when you start chipping away at your access to do that, that's a problem. And where we have issues like that now with the way the law was changed for accidents, for example, is that they've limited what you could show the jury as to like your medical bills.
Okay. So if I have, let's say, God forbid, I get out of here, I have an accident, I call you and I say, Amanda, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. You know, they crashed into me. I had a $30,000 expense because I broke my back or they broke my back. What happens now if I want to take those people to court?
So, well, let's take a quick break because they're bringing us cafecito, and we all love cafecito time. Thank you.
Amazing.
Now we're going to talk even faster. Thank you.
Beautiful branded cup.
Oh, that's good cafecito. You'll be able to take one of these.
Yeah.
All my merch.
Love them. Love the merch. I'm a merch person.
So what happens is that the way it limits you, these type of laws, is that you just say, well, I have $30,000 because I hurt my back.
Right.
Well, what happens if you go to a doctor that charged you $30,000 and now you have that bill? You chose that doctor. That's a right to privacy, which that's the sixth of it. Every amendment gets affected by this. Yeah. You get to pick the doctor you want to go to and you feel comfortable with. Well, he charges $30,000. Well, now they're saying, no, you can't show the jury $30,000 because that's excessive. Wow. And who's determining who's excessive? The insurance companies.
Okay.
Why? Because then they don't want to have to pay it for the guy who caused the accident because he's probably insured by another company. So it really becomes the battle of the insurance companies. We're just stuck in the middle, right? Okay. So when you're limiting someone to show their peers, the jury, that the evidence of what damage this caused you, not what damage is reasonable. No, this is what it caused you. Right. Then you're limiting your evidence to only what they want to say is reasonable. But who is the measure of that? Under the Constitution, it should be a jury of your peers. So that, to me, is an infringement of our individual rights under the Constitution. Is it
possible that this would go to the Supreme Court of Florida and get...
Yes. Okay. So, like I was saying, us attorneys don't really make the law in the legislative branch. Like, we're not drafting the statutes, but what we do is that with the fact patterns and the people we represent and the great arguments we can make in the court, we kind of go molding it. And correcting whatever nonsensical parts of statutes are made. Because, you know, some politicians who are not attorneys will have some good intentions sometimes. Yeah. And will pass a statute that makes no sense when you actually have to apply it in court. They'll say, like, you can't show this to the jury, but you could show this. But then they forget that there's something called the rules of evidence. And how I introduce evidence in court has its own parameters, and it's always had them. So I didn't need that extra step that they just created. So we'll correct things like that. But that's why we have the 3 branches. But at the end of the day, when we get foreclosed, even before we get to the courthouse steps as to what we could present, that's when it's an issue. Because now you're just the only person that is getting kind of discouraged from bringing a claim when they have one.
Would be the person that
are the injured victims.
The injured victim.
Right. So that's a big problem when they chip away at our rights. And they also create parameters or requirements that unbalance the scales of justice before we even get to court. That's a problem.
So where do we go from here?
Well, a lot of these new laws that were changed are things that are now being seen in court, in our trial courts, which is our lower courts. And then if issues that we feel are unconstitutional, we'll go to the appellate court and ultimately could go, I guess, to the Supreme Court.
Right.
The issue we have, though, is that for plaintiffs' attorneys, which is what I kind of do, we don't really have very friendly opinions right now on the bench. So it makes it difficult. And, you know, it's not really necessarily politics. It's just the way that everyone's kind of been holding hands and turning a blind eye to the effects of what these laws do. There's no secret that in Florida, and especially in South Florida, we have issues with fraud.
Yeah.
Fraud.
I was going to ask, I wanted to be,
fraud is an issue.
Yeah, I wanted to be a little bit conservative about that and ask, without, again, I don't know much. That's why I'm here. I want to learn and I want to be able to tell people. But I did see some articles, I think, that said that the reason why this is happening was because insurance companies and there was so much fraud.
Right.
There was.
So it's an interesting, dichotomy, but there is fraud. We are the kings of fraud down in South Florida. But politicians should find a smarter way to cure the fraud or outsmart the fraudsters that doesn't include,
it doesn't hurt
the victim.
Right.
Because guess what? You may foreclose some of these fraudsters who may be giving fraudulent medical care or inflating bills of things they didn't do. That's kind of in my industry. But at the end of the day, they're just going to close up shop and go create fraud in some other scheme because they're fraudsters.
Fraudster.
So, but now the law of the land is something that really affects the injured person, and the navigating that is difficult. But I always say, politicians, you got to be smarter. Yeah. You got to do better. You got to do better.
You got to do better, but it's also a call to action for the average person that's not paying attention to what these politicians are doing behind closed doors.
100%.
You know, we get busy. Oftentimes, like, we're working, we have kids, we have a family, we have businesses, and we're not necessarily paying attention to the laws that are being passed, or if they're being lobbied, in this case, by big insurance. I know that, like, State Farm and, like, different insurances have given a lot of money to different politicians in Florida. I saw that.
A lot of
money. And we're not paying attention to that. We're not calling them, right? So there's, obviously, as you said, attorneys are unbiased. You guys, you know, you're not in politics. But for the people that are going to watch this, like, pay attention to
I think it's
the money,
extremely,
call them, email them, like, show up to their offices.
Extremely important to follow the money. Mm-hmm. Extremely important to be involved in elections and to voice your opinion.
Right.
Because it does matter. And the whole theme of fraud obviously is something that the big insurance companies push.
Yeah.
Because it's easy. Oh, look at all this money we had to pay because of fraudulent claims. But if you dig a little deeper, not much of it is fraud, right? They call it fraud because they feel like they're getting money out of their pocket. And let's be clear, insurance companies are really just companies that reinvest their premiums into other assets they have, including the money market accounts. So they want to hold on to as much money as they can for as long as they can. That's why they deny claims. Mm-hmm. And that's why then attorneys have to sue them when they deny a claim. But if you look at South Florida, we do have an interesting melting pot of people here. And I always say, they say, there's some fraud in, like, the clinics, whatever. Let's take accidents, for example, in detail. Well, yes, there's also more accidents here because if you go, you drive here, we have.
Oh, yeah.
And my husband's Dominican, but the Dominicans drive very different from the Venezuelans. The Colombians have their thing. Like, Dominicans don't respect the traffic lines. The other ones don't use blinkers. The other ones like to speed. A lot of people that come from Cuba never had a vehicle. So you have a melting pot of, like, these different traffic ideas, which really does cause more accidents. And it is more dangerous. So there is more accidents. So that's not fraud. Right. So what comes after it then maybe could be fraud, but then there's ways to address that without having to just close everyone off.
It's kind of like with the hurricane situation, like what we face with with home insurances here. Obviously, we have hurricanes that hit us. Like, another place in the United States doesn't have that. So you need that home insurance.
They're just
and that flood
upset
insurance.
that they have to pay so many claims out, but it's like,
there's more accidents, so therefore there's going to be more
Don't tell me you don't make money. Yeah. State Farm, Progressive, all state. Don't tell me you don't make money in Florida. You wouldn't be in Florida if you didn't make money in Florida. Yeah. So that's, but it's interesting. The marketing part of the insurances, the way that they just try to make themselves look friendly, like a good neighbor, I'm here. Like, Flo, she's so cool. Yes. She would never deny my claim. Right. Come on, guys. Wake up. Right. Open your eyes. No, it's interesting. When you're in trial for a car accident, typically my client's a person, Maria Perez. Maria Perez sues Joe. Right. And Joe is the one that shows up in court. But really, it's Joe's insurance that's responding. Mm-hmm. Joe's Progressive, Joe's Geico puts up an attorney. They put up an attorney and they put up a whole dog and pony show at trial. But I can never mention to the jury, by the way, all those experts that Joe is spending all his money on, and all those projectors and this big show he put together that seems like he's really defending himself is really an insurance company. We can never mention insurance in court. Ever.
Now, moving forward?
Ever. We've never been able to say, because they don't want the jury to think, there's insurance, there's big money.
Right.
Right. But it's always interesting to me, especially me, because I do like advertising, or I'm out in the public letting them know what my services are, that they'll say, you should hold it against an attorney that advertises, because maybe if you didn't see that advertising, you wouldn't even made up this claim. They love to do that theme, But it's interesting that I can never get up there and say, well, Flo from, Progressive or whichever one she is, or, all the celebrities you put, the basketball players you put in your commercials, conned you into buying an insurance and now denies your claims.
Like LeBron, right? With Progressive, I think.
I don't know. I mean, attorneys cannot advertise with celebrities, at least not in Florida. Right. But the insurances can. Yeah. And you can mention insurance in trial or their advertising, but you can mention attorney advertising as like, a bad thing.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, had you never seen Amanda's billboard,
they'll
you would
say
have
like,
never cared
they'll
to
say like, right. So you didn't go to a doctor or you weren't hurt until you hired your attorney that's on the bus. Yeah. Is it that you were hurt or because you saw her advertising? And I'm like, what? But they love to do this and they have all these tactics to like try to convince the jury about like the noise instead of the facts. Right. Your guy crashed into somebody. They're hurt and they went to a doctor of their choice and now you don't want to pay the bill because you just want to get away with paying less. Sometimes they're not even denying like liability. Like, the accident happened, but we're just not going to pay that much. And it's not about, the person hurt wants an insurmountable amount, but it's like you can't even now introduce the actual bills. Right. So now that's the type of thing that says like limits you. Mm-hmm. And they changed other things. Like in Florida, we used to have 4 years after an injury to like to close to bring a claim, but now it's 4.
How many years was it before?
I mean, now it's 2 years. Sorry,
2 years.
So it used to be 4. 2.
Okay.
So you have to put in a suit faster.
Would that be, forgive my ignorance, a statute of limitation?
Yeah, that's a statute of limitation.
Okay, so that's lower down.
For personal injury, now it's lower. But I mean, in my office, we file lawsuits a lot. Yeah. So that doesn't change much for me. Right. I'm like, bring it. Let's go to court. Yeah. But those are things that have changed. But I would love to continue to talk to you about it. Yeah. And if, any of your followers or people, have questions, it's just, it runs the gamut and it's so detailed, but it was a big change and it does affect people. And if you don't call an attorney that knows what they're talking about in this specific niche immediately, you could stand to lose a lot of your rights.
So now you guys know she is a shark and you need to call her Amanda Demanda because pro people. And that's what we need here because your politicians are not going to look out for you. They just kind of screwed over Floridians a little bit. And the insurance companies certainly don't want to pay the people.
The insurance companies got a big win. And that's unfortunate because no matter race, height, weight, gender, political affiliation, everyone gets injured and everyone has legal troubles.
It happened to me years ago, when I was still in college. So over a really bad accident. Yeah. But I understand what that.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful studio. Beautiful office.
All right, guys. Well, this was our first podcast in the studio. And thank you, Linda, for being here. We're going to bring you more content.
Bye.